Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It was a normal Friday evening when I first noticed something was off. I lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood, one where everyone knew everyone, at least on the surface. Our houses were modest, our lives simple, and our neighbors always seemed pleasant. One neighbor in particular had always caught my eye. Emily and Tom, a married couple in their mid-30s who lived in the house next door. They were the quintessential quiet neighbors. They kept to themselves, always polite, but never intrusive. No loud parties, no drama. The perfect neighbors, or so I thought my husband Jack, and I often exchanged pleasantries with them when we saw them in the yard, but we never really knew them well. Tom was a quiet, reserved man, often seen working in his garage or reading in the evenings. Emily, on the other hand, was warm but distant. She'd always smile and wave, but there was something about her that made me feel she was hiding something. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the intuition nagged at me every time I saw her. Things were pretty routine for a while until that one night. It started like any other evening. Jack had a late meeting at work, so I was home alone, scrolling through my phone and making dinner. I hadn't seen Tom or Emily for a few days, which wasn't unusual, but tonight, something felt different. Around 9 p.m., I heard the sound of voices outside. I went to my window and glanced across the yard, trying to make out the figures in the dim light. There, just outside their front door, stood Tom, only he wasn't alone. A woman, much younger than Emily, stood beside him. They were close, too close, laughing softly as they shared a drink. At first, I thought it was just a friend, maybe a colleague or distant relative, but the way they looked at each other, the chemistry between them was undeniable. My heart sank. I had seen that look before on the faces of couples who were more than friends. I tried to shake off the unease that crept up on me, but it lingered. They seemed to be having an intimate conversation, the kind you have with someone you share a deep connection with. The woman touched Tom's arm, and he responded with a smile that I had never seen him give Emily. The moment stretched on for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was only a few minutes before the woman kissed him on the cheek and left. I watched as Tom stood there for a moment, his expression unreadable. He wiped his mouth, like he was trying to rid himself of something that wasn't right. He turned and went back inside, closing the door behind him. The evening was quiet again, but my mind was racing. Had I just witnessed infidelity? The scene I'd seen outside their house didn't sit well with me, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal for Emily and for myself as well, because it felt like I'd been living a lie that my quiet neighbors the next few. Days were awkward. I saw Tom around the neighborhood, but I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eye. I kept wondering about Emily. Did she know? Did she suspect something was going on? Every time I saw her, I felt a twinge of guilt, like I knew something she didn't, and I was too afraid to tell her. Then came the night that changed everything. It had been about a week since I saw Tom with the other woman. I was at home again, and Jack was out of town for business. The evening was calm, but then I heard the sound of someone at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before answering. When I opened the door, standing there was Emily. Her face was pale, her eyes red from what looked like crying. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I invited her inside, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. What was she going to tell me? As soon as she sat down, she looked at me, searching my face. I don't know who else to turn. "Tio," she began. I've been married to Tom for almost 10 years, and I always thought we were happy. But recently, something changed. He's been distant, cold even. I thought it was just stress from work, but I feel like there's more to it. I found a message on his phone the other day from a woman. They've been seeing each other for months. She paused, her hands shaking as she wiped away a tear. I don't know how to confront him. I don't even know if I can believe it, but I need to know the truth. Do you think I should talk to him? My stomach turned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily's world was unraveling in front of me, and I was the only one who knew what had been happening. I thought about the kiss I had seen, the way they looked at each other. It was clear now. Tom had been having an affair. I had never felt more conflicted in my life. I wanted to tell her everything, but at the same time, I felt guilty for even knowing about the affair in the first place. Emily, I think you deserve the truth, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, but I saw something. A week ago, I saw Tom with another woman, and the way they looked at each other, it was clear they were more than friends. Her face turned ashen, and she let out a small, broken sob. I knew it, she whispered. I knew something was wrong. But to see it, to hear it from someone else, it's so much harder. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the truth hanging between us. I felt for Emily. How could I not? She had been betrayed by the man she had trusted most in the world. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness. For Tom as well, he had made a choice that would tear his life apart. It wasn't just Emily who was going to suffer from this. He was too, over the next few weeks. Emily confronted Tom. The conversation was painful, filled with tears, anger, and regret. Tom admitted to the affair, but he claimed it was a mistake. He begged for forgiveness, but the damage had already been done. Emily made the decision to separate from him, and their marriage ended in a quiet, painful dissolution. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love now stood empty, a silent reminder of the betrayal that had shattered everything Dot is for me. I never looked at Tom the same way again. He remained in the neighborhood, but I never saw him with the same eyes. The quiet neighbor I thought I knew was not the man he had seemed to be. And Emily, despite her heartbreak, eventually moved on. She found strength in herself that she hadn't known existed, and over time she rebuilt her life, focusing on her own happiness rather than the betrayal that had once defined her. Months passed, but the incident lingered in my mind. I saw Emily often, and each time, her healing seemed to unfold like a beautiful flower blooming in the desert. She took up painting, something she'd always wanted to do, but had never had the time for. She enrolled in a fitness class, learning to find strength in her body as well as her heart. And as for Tom, he kept to himself, always avoiding the community events and the social gatherings he once attended. I would occasionally see him walking through the neighborhood, that there was a quiet shame in his posture, like he couldn't face anyone after what he had done. Then, one crisp autumn evening, I noticed Emily walking down the street with a man I had never seen before. He was tall, with a warm smile that matched the spark I hadn't seen in Emily's eyes for years. They were laughing, talking like old friends, and for the first time, I saw her truly happy again. She had moved on. She had found someone who respected her, someone who would never betray her Dot. It was in that moment that I realized how much of an impact that one night had truly made, not just on Emily's life, but on everyone around her. The pain of infidelity can crush people, but it can also empower them to rise again. And though Emily's life had been shattered by Tom's betrayal, she had come out stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the next chapter of her life. And that, in the end, was the real lesson for me. I'll never forget that night, nor will I forget the lesson it taught me. Appearances are often deceiving, and the quietest of neighbors may hold the deepest of secrets. As the months passed, the dynamic in the neighborhood shifted. What had once been a peaceful, almost idyllic street now felt different to me. Every time I looked at Tom's house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of discomfort. He no longer kept up appearances like he used to. The lawn wasn't trimmed as neatly, the house was quiet, and more often than not, the blinds were drawn. I could feel the weight of his shame just by glancing in his direction. It was as if he was hiding from the world and from himself. Emily, on the other hand, was undergoing a transformation that no one could have predicted. The grief and hurt that had once clouded her face had slowly but surely faded, replaced by a quiet resilience. She had always been a private person, but now she was starting to open up to others. I saw her more frequently around town, and she had a new energy about her, an air of freedom that seemed to fill the space she occupied. She was finally living her life again, not defined by Tom's betrayal, but empowered by her own strength. Her first big step came when she decided to sell the house. It wasn't something she had planned at first. The home had been full of memories, good and bad, but it was ultimately a place that had witnessed the slow decay of her marriage. She found a buyer quickly, and I remember the day she closed the door for the last time. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with a mix of sadness and relief. She told me that she felt as though she was shedding an old skin, one that had carried the weight of betrayal and disappointment. But when she left, it was as if she had left the old version of herself behind too. The decision to sell the house was part of Emily's larger journey toward healing. She moved into a charming apartment downtown, a place that felt like a fresh start. It wasn't luxurious, but it was hers. It was her space to reclaim. I could see the spark of excitement in her eyes every time she talked about her new place, and the sadness that once dominated her conversations had disappeared. In the meantime, Tom seemed to retreat further into his own world. I'd occasionally run into him at the corner store or while taking walks in the neighborhood, but his demeanor was always downcast. He looked like a man weighed down by a heavy burden. In some strange way, I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He had betrayed the one person who had trusted him most, and the consequences were impossible to ignore. His loneliness was palpable, and I wondered if he was haunted by the choices he had made. One rainy evening, several months after Emily's departure, I ran into him at the local coffee shop. He looked exhausted, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He seemed different, broken, somehow. He recognized me immediately, but he didn't seem eager to engage in small talk. Instead, he asked if he could sit with me. I was surprised, but I agreed. We found a corner booth, and for a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence was awkward, but it felt necessary. Tom was trying to gather the courage to speak, and I could see it wasn't going to be easy. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I've messed up, haven't I?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "I don't know where to start," he continued, his voice trembling. "What I did to Emily, I can't take it back. And every day I feel like I'm drowning in my own mistakes. I loved her, I really did, but I lost sight of everything that mattered. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to offer comfort, but the truth was, his actions had hurt someone I cared about deeply. Emily had been left with the emotional wreckage of his choices, and no amount of words could undo that. Still, I looked at him and said something that, in hindsight, I felt was the only thing I could say. You have to live with what you've done. But maybe, just maybe, you can learn from it and start again." Tom nodded slowly, his face a mix of acceptance and shame. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better person." Over the following months, I watched Tom attempt to rebuild his life, though it wasn't without its struggles. He sought counseling, tried to reconnect with old friends, and began volunteering at a local shelter. But the more he tried to make amends, the more I realized that the damage he had done to his own heart was far deeper than any of us could see. His journey, like Emily's, was one of healing, but theirs were parallel roads, never quite meeting again. Emily, on the other hand, had come into her own. I remember seeing her at a coffee shop one day, chatting happily with a man who seemed to light up her world. His name was David, and she introduced him to me as her new beginning. There was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. The painful chapter of her life with Tom had become just that, a chapter, not the whole story. David was a kind, gentle soul. He respected Emily's past, but he wasn't haunted by it. He embraced her completely, offering her the emotional support she had once lacked. Their relationship wasn't rushed, and there was no pressure. It was clear they were both taking their time, letting their love grow naturally. They traveled together, exploring new places, creating memories that were untainted by the past. Year after Emily moved into her new apartment, she invited me over to celebrate her newfound peace. Her home was cozy, filled with plants and soft lighting. It was a reflection of her journey, calm, nurturing, and full of possibility. As we sat on our couch, sipping tea and talking about life, she turned to me with a smile. She sighed, I didn't think I'd ever be happy again. When everything fell apart with Tom, I thought my world was over. But now I see things differently. It wasn't the end, it was just a new beginning. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Emily had taken the worst moment of her life and used it to forge a new identity. One that was stronger, wiser, and far more compassionate than before. She had learned to love herself again. Something that Tom had failed to do in the wake of his own mistakes. In the end, I learned that sometimes the quietest neighbors are hiding the loudest secrets. And sometimes one night is all it takes to change everything. But in the face of betrayal, there is always the possibility of redemption, not just for the person who is wronged, but for the person who has been wronged as well. And both Emily and Tom, in their own ways, would find peace again, though perhaps not in the way they had originally imagined. Their journeys were different, but they were both stepping towards something better, something true. As for me, I learned that the truth isn't always what it seems on the surface, and that life, in all its complexity, is about learning to move forward. No matter how heavy the past may feel. As the seasons continue to change, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had shifted in our small neighborhood. Emily had not only found a new sense of independence, but she had also grown into someone stronger and more self-aware than I ever imagined. It was clear that her journey wasn't just about moving on from Tom's betrayal, but rediscovering who she was without the shadow of that relationship. She had become a symbol of resilience for me, and in many ways, her transformation inspired me to take a deeper look at my own life and relationships. For a long time, I had prided myself on having everything in order. Jack and I were a stable couple, comfortable in our routines and the predictability of life. But as I watched Emily embrace her life with such vigor, it made me wonder if I had taken my own marriage for granted. Were we truly as happy as I thought we were, or had we settled into complacency? I began to talk to Jack more openly about my thoughts. He, too, had noticed the changes in me. One night, after dinner, I turned to him with a question I hadn't yet voiced. Jack, do you think we're living the life we imagined when we first got married? Jack looked at me, surprised by my sudden shift in tone. We had always been content, but now I realized there were cracks I hadn't been willing to address. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, have we let ourselves fall into a routine? Have we stopped growing both individually and as a couple? The conversation. That night wasn't easy, but it was necessary. We talked about our dreams, our goals, and the ways we had unconsciously stopped challenging ourselves. It wasn't about infidelity or betrayal. It was about something deeper, something I hadn't fully realized until I saw Emily go through her own journey. I had learned through her transformation that it wasn't just about surviving the storms in life, but about thriving in the aftermath. I realized we had stopped striving for more because we were too comfortable, too afraid to take risks. But life was short, and I didn't want us to look back one day and regret not making the most of it. Our conversation sparked a series of changes in our own lives. We decided to take a more active role in our marriage. We planned trips, big and small, to reconnect with each other and explore the world outside our comfort zones. We started a small project together, something simple, like renovating our kitchen, but it brought us closer, reminding us of the joy of building something together. We took dance classes, something neither of us had ever tried before, laughing at ourselves in the process. Our marriage didn't become perfect overnight, but we began to understand the value of growth. And like Emily, we learned to embrace change, even if it meant stepping out of our safe, familiar routine. I realized that love, like life, required effort and constant attention. Sometimes it's not the grand gestures that matter most, but the small, everyday acts that remind you of why you started. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of Emily's separation from Tom, I began to notice subtle shifts in the neighborhood. People like me were paying more attention to their own lives, reevaluating relationships and personal growth. It seemed that Emily's story had sparked something in all of us. People who had been quietly struggling with their own hidden battles started talking about their challenges more openly, finding ways to seek help and support. I wasn't the only one who had been inspired by Emily's courage. Tom, too, seemed to be undergoing his own version of change. A few months after their divorce was finalized, he began attending neighborhood gatherings again. But this time, he wasn't the same distant, closed-off man he had been. He had softened. He wasn't as quick to talk, but when he did, there was a vulnerability in his words that had never existed before. One day, I saw Tom walking his dog, and he stopped to talk. We hadn't spoken much since the coffee shop conversation, but he seemed genuinely eager to reconnect in some way. His first words to me were unexpected. "I don't know how to make up for what I did to Emily, but I've realized I have to start somewhere. I can't keep hiding from what happened or from who I am." We talked for a while, and for the first time, I saw Tom for who he is. A man deeply regretful, deeply flawed, but also trying to be better. He didn't expect forgiveness from anyone, but he was determined to live a life where he could hold his head up without the weight of his past mistakes suffocating him. He had started therapy, and he had taken up running as a way to clear his mind. It was, in some strange way, inspiring to see him trying to find redemption in his own life. A few months later, I ran into Emily at the local farmer's market. She was walking through the stalls, holding hands with David, the man she'd been seeing for a while. They were both laughing, sharing a private joke. The joy on her face was radiant, and I could see that she was genuinely at peace. Emily had found someone who respected her, someone who didn't see her as a possession or a prize, but as an equal, someone to build a future with. It was clear that David had been a gentle force in her life, one that allowed her to heal in ways that Tom never had done as we caught up. Emily told me that she was considering starting her own business. She had always dreamed of being her own boss, but she had put those dreams on hold for years while she focused on her family and marriage. Now, with David's encouragement and the support of friends like me, she was taking the leap. "It's scary," she admitted, "but I'm excited. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something for me." Her decision to start a business wasn't just about financial independence. It was about reclaiming her autonomy, her power. She was no longer defined by the roles others had assigned to her. She was writing her own story, and it was one of empowerment. That evening after our chat, I reflected on the transformation we had all undergone. Emily had emerged from the darkness of her past with grace and strength, and now she was flourishing in ways that I never thought possible. Tom, too, was on his own journey, one that was slow and difficult, but one where he was learning to confront his own demons. And for Jack and me, we had learned the value of communication and growth within our own marriage. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to bring about a change that would never have occurred otherwise. Emily's pain had not only reshaped her life, but it had reshaped the lives of those around her. The infidelity, the betrayal, the heartache, all of it had given way to something better. And in the process, I learned that the most important thing in life isn't about avoiding pain or discomfort, but rather about how we respond to it. We can choose to stay stuck in the past, or we can use it to fuel our transformation, just as Emily and Tom had done in their own ways. In the end, we are all products of our choices, but we are also capable of making new ones. We all have the ability to rebuild, to reimagine our futures, and to learn from our mistakes. And as Emily, Tom, and I continue to move forward, we understood one simple truth. Life is not about avoiding the storm, but learning how to dance in the rain.